Greta Gerwig is one of my favorite directors. I think this is a person that if I was to sit down and have a conversation with, I would thoroughly enjoy. Going in to watch Barbie, I wanted to watch because this would have been my first time watching her movie that she has directed. So I look forward to it. What I got to watch, I don't really know how to review this movie because it touches on a lot of good things, but it has a lot of bad things. So we'll start with the good. The good things is the movie has a message in which it helps us question a lot of things that Barbie has meant in real life, right? We often speak about this desire to be perfect, like the doll, the psychological impact that it has on people. And I think that the movie touches on this in a good way, like the way that the when we meet one of the characters, the little girl, and how she sort of talks about Barbie and how Barbie has affected women all over the world, and from what research and history has told us, is valid. The other good thing that I like about this movie is the production design. Like the production design is on another level, but then again, you're just taking a miniature world and turning it into real life, which can be challenging, but at least you don't have to think about it. The ideas have already been designed and made, which is perfect for me. I like Margot Robbie's performance in it. I think Margot, for me, for a long time, I've always felt like she is one dimensional. Like she mainly just acts the same character with the New Jersey accent. Which, if you didn't know what the New Jersey accent is, it's like just play a Margot Robbie movie and you'll learn what that is. So going into this, I was worried that we're gonna get Haley Quinn in pink, but that's not what we get. The first minute of the movie, the opening image, which I feel is a critical thing when it comes to movies, we get to see these odds. They I don't know if it was mockery or if it's a way of saying of I don't know what they were trying to do, but you have this opening that's similar to 2001 Space Odyssey, and we move from there to showing how the world changed from when kids were playing being moms to when Barbie came along, and then all of a sudden you don't have to play with babies, but you get to play with these plastic little dolls, which is Margot Robbie. That's how the character is introduced to us, which is perfect and fine, you know. But from there, I get confused because I don't really understand the questions that the movie is asking. And by the end of the movie, I don't really get answers to those questions. So, one of the main things when we start up, we're in this perfect world where Barbie goes to take a shower and there's no water, and she goes to drink tea and there's no tea because, that's haha, reality and Barbie world. Great. And then she starts having these thoughts, these irrepressible thoughts of death, and then that's what the movie sort of centers around it, and that becomes the theme in my assumption. Like the theme of the movie is imperfection and death and these ideas, and then you feel like we are off on a journey to get this question answered, where Barbie has to come to the real world to get her answers, that she needs in order to go back to perfect Barbie. And then she goes on this journey, she comes into the real world, and causes. So I'm assuming her coming into the real world would cause some form of mishap, and which would affect, which Will Ferrell's character says, if she is allowed into the real world, it will create something that we have never imagined before. And then what happens is Ken comes with her, and Ken learns about patriarchy, and then he's like, "Oh, I can go teach this to the man from where I'm from. I'm respected. I'm this." And then the movie starts to touch on the subject area of patriarchy and how society operates, and how in Barbie world the world is run by women, but in the real world the world is run by men. And we sort of go down this path, which is like, all right, cool. I can see where we're going with this. Let's go. The suspension of disbelief is still there. I'm assuming, and then we go through this path whereby Barbie, for some reason, takes the people back, the mother and daughter, to Barbie land, and we realize the men have taken over the world. Patrick has taken over the world. It's destroyed Barbie world from what it was to being kingdom, and we go through this whole phase. And in during this, we also learn that those irrepressible thoughts that Barbie was having belong to the mother who goes through different cycles of life. And when they come back, the idea is, oh, Barbie world is destroyed. Now they have to save Barbie world by educating the women. But one thing, for me that stood out was how for a minute the women in this society were happy. Like these people, one woman was like, I don't have to think anymore, I can rest. It's freeing. And you get these stereotypes of real world, which I'm assuming is what the movie was attempting to say. And then you get to see how much that harmony that the Barbies had is gone, and how they have to fight for it back. And then you get to this point where the character played by America starts talking about how hard it is to be a woman, which I feel like, if for me, in that part of the movie, it made no sense because most of the things she said are the challenges of being a human being. How you can be so wrong and have everything be your fault, because the human experience, nothing is perfect. No one does the perfect thing. Everything is okay until you're doing wrong. And then she makes it about women, and then you're like, oh, this is a movie about feminism. This is what we're doing. But remember, the theme that they stated was there's something to do with these thoughts that Barbie was having in the first act. But we've thrown those ideas away. Now we're trying to save the world from patriarchy, I'm assuming. And then we go through that journey. And at the end of the movie, the patriarchy is destroyed. And ultimately, the solution we learn is Barbie has to be Barbie and Ken has to be Ken. And then you're like asking yourself, what are these metaphors meaning? What does the information that I'm getting from this movie mean? And none of it makes sense. Is what we're supposed to learn, that people should be separated, that women should be women and men should be men. Like there is Ken and there is Barbie, or is it Ken and Barbie coming together to create a world? Because the way that I understand life is we should come together in partnerships and creating and co-creating and procreating and moving forward. But it feels like the movie questions all those things, which for me, I feel like the best way for me to understand this movie is to sit down with Greta Gerwig and have a conversation around what she was trying to say, because it's not what I get out of the entire movie by the time that it's done. And then when it's done, you have this part, when people were saying, oh, this movie makes you cry, and then it's in the final scene or in the final act where you're like, oh, I can understand why people were crying, because you get to a point where Barbie doesn't want to be in Barbie world but wants to come live in the real world, which ironically the real world is run by men. Why would she leave the world that she fought to build? Like it makes no sense that people want perfection for other people but not for themselves. And then you get that human experience of, I don't really know what I want, but what I know is I want to explore and I want to live. I want to have that human experience. And I don't want to just be an idea. I want to know that I can live. But I also understand that at some point I will die, because that is the concept. And that introduces a new theme for me. The entire movie is just built on different thematics, which never gets you satisfied. You never get a satisfactory conclusion of what the movie is about. You're constantly just going, and then, and what? And then the funny part about it all is when the movie ends, Barbie goes to a gynecologist and is like, oh, she has a vagina now. And then you're like, what was this all about? So is it that her irrepressible thoughts that she had in the opening of the movie was she didn't have a vagina, so now she has it at the end? Is that the journey? Is that the character arc, that she's gone from being a plastic doll to being a real human? What message is this movie pushing out? And for me, there's a lot of plot holes and there's a lot of questions from a cinematic movie. And I feel like one of the challenges that I had is having watched Oppenheimer first, which is an intellectual movie that actually engages you and rewards you for paying attention, to watching a movie which is just about pretty picture and a pretty woman and pretty man, and that doesn't give you that satisfaction. It forces you to give it to suspend your disbelief, because it's not a movie that I feel was meant to be intellectual. It lacks a lot of, it lacks for me ambiguity. It fails to answer questions that it asks of you, and it feels confusing. It feels at the end of the day, you're just confused. There's a point where they're like, oh, nothing is always as beautiful, and then you have Margot Robbie, and I like that whoever decided to be like, if you're gonna make this movie about showing the lack of beauty, don't cast Margot Robbie, which is a valid point because it felt like at that point they were like, oh, let's just remove makeup from her face and that would make her ugly. But she's Margot Robbie, she's pretty regardless, and I feel like the movie fails to touch on the subject that it tries to, and I do not know what the problem is, whether the problems were in the edit or it was just a terrible script. But the movie for me fails in many levels, and I do not even understand who the movie is also targeted for. Because when I was in the theater, I was sitting around kids, like there were 8-year-olds, 6-year-olds kids in there, and some of the subject matter, it didn't make sense to me why you would feed such information to kids. And the movie didn't feel as if it touches on adults because a lot of adults would ask questions like, what are we watching? What message are we getting out of this? So for me, one, I'm a big fan of Greta Gerwig, the person, but I think this movie, it just doesn't do what I thought it would do. And I don't know, maybe I was not the intended audience, but it felt like a waste of 2 hours, to be honest. The only thing that the movie gives is it's a beautiful movie. I didn't like the cinematography in it. It felt lazy. A lot of the work that was done on the movie, everything is lit from the dumb side. Everything is shot from the dumb side. There is no contextual. The artwork doesn't try. Like at a certain point, they just gave up, which is disappointing.